has been focused on, helping and taking care of one another. And once you give somebody a hand up and some support, then I think, people can really blossom.
Shepherd Center and Family Refuge Center serve a different part of the community, but their work is very, very vital. The Shepherd Center enables elderly people who can't manage completely on their own to be able to stay in their own home with help. The Shepherd Center provides transportation to the doctor, to go grocery shopping, and things that they need to do. They also have friendly visitors who will come and cheer up somebody who's all alone and lonesome. They have phone visitors for people who aren't able to get to visit, but at least they talk on the phone and cheer them up and see if they need anything.
You need a hug.
Is what you need.
Thank you.
I volunteer at the Family Refuge Center, and I got interested in it through Gloria. She was the one who told me they needed help, and it was the most wonderful thing I ever did for myself.
Our job at the Refuge Center, our mission is to work on the issues of domestic violence and sexual assault and to promote healthy families.
Gloria Martin is somebody that you can really count on for so many things. I mean, Family Refuge Center is the first thing that comes to mind, but there's so many other things, and we're so fortunate that she does that, and she has the abilities and stamina and enthusiasm to help out the community in so many ways.
She is, of course, most dedicated to her family and her wonderful husband. She's very dedicated to her. The love of her life is the way she's described him many times.
She and Bill will put up people at their house to stay, those that are performing at Carnegie Hall, or maybe some interns from the Greenbrier Valley Theater. She's got a great sense of humor and opens her house up for lots of events. And having Gloria there is probably the best part of it.
Some people live by themselves, but I really think we were meant to all be together and to help one another. And all of us need help at some point in our life. And so we owe it to each other to extend that hand for helping somebody, or to give that hand out when we need help. And our community will only be as good as all the people that are in it. And so if we don't take care of each other, we really need to take care of each other. Probably now in our history more than ever, we need to take care of one another. And to sort of, how can we all come to some common ground? I think that's the other thing that is really important. It's important in our history right now. There has to be common ground for us to solve our problems. So I hope we can think about how we can do that.
I really believe that the community has been blessed with Gloria.
My maternal grandmother was born in Croatia, and at the time it was part of Austria, so she always referred to herself as an Austrian. My grandfather and her brother came to the United States first to find a place to live and get jobs, and then sent for her. So she was 19 years old. She was a peasant girl, and she did not go to school. She didn't read or write. And she always told about getting on a train and going across land in Europe. I'm assuming she went across Europe, and then got on a ship in England and came to the United States. So they came to New York, to the harbor in New York, and they got all the immigrants up on the top of the ship where they could see that they were coming into the harbor. And the Statue of Liberty, of course, was there. And oftentimes, you know, we think that that was a great emotional moment for immigrants, and I think it was for my grandmother. But the thing that made the biggest impression upon her was Ellis Island, because immigrants had to get through Ellis Island in order to stay in the United States. She told stories of being concerned about getting through Ellis Island, and they used crochet hooks to pull up their eyelids to be sure they didn't have pink eye. And so it was a big deal for her to get through Ellis Island. She had all of her papers pinned inside her coat. Someone read her papers and put her on a train, and she came all the way across the United States. Now this was 1901, and she was 19 years old, and she was by herself. She didn't come with a group of people. I think that's truly amazing and speaks to the immigrants and how they felt about this country. It was a new world. She married my grandfather, and they had 6 children. And my grandfather died when my mother was 3 years old. My mother was a wonderful lady. She was the youngest of these kids, and she was kind of easygoing and always willing to listen to us and help us out. I'm the oldest of 3 children, and I had a really nice childhood. You know, I probably would have been considered maybe not poor. My dad was a smelterman. I grew up in Anaconda, Montana, and at the time it was a copper smelting community. Butte, Montana was 25 miles away, where they mined the copper, and then it was shipped to Anaconda, where there was a smelting process. And the town was filled with immigrants, because there were a lot of immigrants that came for these jobs. And they not only came from Croatia and Bosnia, they came from Italy, they came from Ireland, they came from Germany, they came from the Nordic countries. So the town was filled with, you know, with all this wonderful ethnic mixture of people, and lots of kids. For a while we lived with my grandmother. My father was in the Navy during the Second World War, and my mother and I lived there, and then my sister came along at the end of the war, and we lived for another bit of time with my grandmother. So my early life, she really influenced me. And then my mom and dad bought a house, and we moved out, but we only moved about 1.5 blocks away. So here was my grandmother, who was illiterate in her own language. She never learned how to read or write English, and she spoke kind of a pidgin English, as it were, you know. And we all spoke her language, and I always thought it was pretty neat that we could speak another language. And so anyway, when women got the vote, she thought that was very important.
Our country calls on us tonight, Democrats, good Democrats, to battle bravely for the right. Democrats, good Democrats, 80 years ago we won.
She would vote, she would go vote, and of course she couldn't read. And so we would go, I went into the voting booth with her, and I was allowed to read to her, and then she would mark who she wanted to vote for. She was a great admirer of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, because of course she lived through the Depression, bringing up kids and living from one meal to another. And so I would say, Mayor, Mr. Smith, Mr. Jones, and she'd say, Democrat. So I would mark Democrat. We'd go to the next office, and she said, Democrat, and I'd mark Democrat. So, you know, I got it instilled in me a long time ago. My political leanings, you know, it came from my grandmother. She was just a real inspiration to me. I spent a lot of my time with her as a young woman, and I think it just influenced me. It influenced me to think the country was a great place, and I try to continue to hope that it's a great place, and that it was a land of opportunity for people to come from other countries where things were not things were not good for them, and that they could make a new life. One of the things that gave you a great deal of freedom in this town was if you had a bicycle. And boy, did I want a bike. Really, really wanted a bicycle. And I was in third grade, and I had a third grade sister Francois, and she gave us a lesson one day, and she said that if you prayed, your prayers would be answered. So I thought, wow, this is going to be good. I will pray to get my bicycle, okay? So I prayed and I prayed and I prayed about the bike, and no bicycle appeared, you know. And of course I knew on the other hand that my family probably didn't have the money to go and buy me a bicycle, okay? So I went to Sister Francois one day and I said, you know, God does not answer your prayers. And she looked at me like I was speaking heresy. And I said, and she says, yes, God does answer your prayers. And I said, well, I prayed and prayed and prayed for a bicycle. I don't have a bicycle. And she says, well, sometimes God answers your prayers, doesn't always give you the answer you want. Okay? So, whoa, I was, oh, God didn't answer my prayer. So then I think, of course, in my little third grade mind, that God must be mad at me. And whoa, 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 whoa. So I go home and I'm kind of mulling this over, and my dad starts to talk to me. So I told him this story, you know, and he says, well, I'll make you a deal. He said, if you save half of what it takes to buy a bicycle, I'll give you the other half. Well, I had the bike picked up. I knew where it was. It was in Marchand's Hardware. It was a blue and white Schwinn bicycle. I knew exactly the bicycle I wanted, and it was $52. It took me a while to save the money that I needed, half of the money to buy the bicycle. And my dad was true to his word. He gave me the other half, and I had my bicycle, and oh man, great freedom when you had a bike. Later on, I found out that not everybody held up their end of the bargain like my dad did. You know, I learned that along the way. When I was a little girl, I wanted to learn how to play the piano, and I didn't have a piano. And so the Catholic sisters said to me, well, that wasn't a problem. They would teach me how to play the piano, and I could come. We had an hour for lunch, and we walked home to lunch, and I lived just a couple blocks from school. If you came back half an hour early, you could practice on the pianos they had in the practice room. And so I did that. That's how I learned how to play the piano. And when I was in 6th grade, my mom and dad bought a piano for me. The good sisters decided that there was 3 or 4 of us that they ought to teach how to play the organ, which they did. And we accompanied the choir, and we sang, and I've been mostly in the choir loft the rest of my life. One of the things that I think probably I learned it before I went to college, but I really got a good dose of it in college, was the Catholic social justice philosophy. You know, also coming from a community of immigrants, you know, that I think I got a good dose of that, caring about other people, and it stayed with me all of my life, that there was that there was an obligation for us to help the poor. I wanted to join the Peace Corps, and really was accepted in the program, but then I got married instead. Bill and I grew up in the same town. He grew up on that western side of town, I grew up on the eastern side of town. I think he was in my English class, but I always remembered him as this red-headed kid who was always kind of not paying attention all the time, but you know, I liked him well enough. I knew who he was. He came to Carroll College, and out of the blue, he asked me to go to the movies and to go get a pizza. So I thought, shoot, why not? So I went. It was a weird date in many ways, but it was a lot of fun. And so I thought, well, I'll be all right, you know. So when he asked me to go out again, I went out again with him, you know. People said, oh, you were childhood sweethearts. No, we weren't even college sweethearts. Okay. When I was in Minnesota, I had these 3 and 4 very small children, and Bill encouraged me to, you know, get out of the house. I'll watch the kids. But I wanted to do something that was, you know, I just didn't want to go shopping or go to the park. And the chairman of Bill's department, his wife encouraged me to join the League of Women Voters, which I did, and met the most fabulous women. I really did. They were bright, and they were engaged, and they were smart, and they were interested. They taught me a lot about politics. They taught me a lot about policy. They taught me a lot about how you make change. And so I belonged to the League of Women Voters in Minnesota. I also joined them in Kentucky and was very active in the League of Women Voters in Kentucky. Was on the state board for a while. Well, the one thing that happened to us when we lived in Kentucky was Bill was diagnosed with testicular cancer. And he was 38 years old at the time. And I did the classic kind of thing. I said, oh no, this can't be happening to us. It's a wrong diagnosis. They got the diagnosis wrong. And then, of course, when it was true that the diagnosis was not wrong, well then how could this be happening to us? I went through all the classic kinds of things and envisioned that I'd be a widow with 4 small children. And he had a considerable amount of surgery, never had to have chemotherapy or radiation, but you know, I'm proud to say he was cured. And that was a pretty traumatizing thing. You know, our friends were really the people that rallied around and helped us get through all that. You know, they took the kids, they helped us out, they cooked supper for us, and it was really, you know, really affirming for me to have all these really, really close and dear friends. I didn't think West Virginia was going to be the place I'd spend the rest of my life. My kids had a bit of an adjustment. They'd been in big schools, but they took to it right away. And of course, Bill liked his job a lot at the osteopathic school. It probably took me a little while, but then I got a job with the American Cancer Society. And I was a district director. I had 8 counties. And I got out and I got to meet West Virginians. And it didn't take me long to figure out that these were really like the people that I grew up with. You know, they were people from small towns. They were hardworking people. What you see is what you get. I worked with all these volunteers in all these 8 counties around here, and I really got to love West Virginians. And it doesn't take very long of going around on all the wild, crazy roads to see the natural beauty of the state. The place is beautiful. It's just beautiful. And at the time, we had 4 children still at home, but 3 that were in high school and were soon going to be on their way to college. My job at the Cancer Society was pretty overwhelming, and so I was pretty frazzled, and I had a conversation with my husband, and he said, well, just go do another job, go do something else, which really hadn't occurred to me quite then. I don't know why, but it didn't. So at any rate, I left the American Cancer Society with some regret, because I really liked the people that I worked with, and I loved doing all that work with volunteers, because volunteers do it because they love it. You know, they do it for all the right reasons, and so I left with a little bit of regret. I was always interested in women's issues. I, of course, was interested in the work that the Refuge Center did. And had made some contributions, you know, and was quite aware of what they were doing. So I applied for the job. And the job description was that I was to go to Monroe County, to Pocahontas County, and to Western Greenbrier, and start to establish, in a little more formal manner, services for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault in those 3 locations.
What you gonna do when the silence falls? What you gonna do when the silence falls? Dance alone to the radio, all dressed up, no place to go. What you gonna do when the silence falls?
The first day I came to work, there was a woman there who had been kidnapped by her boyfriend, and she and her children had been taken all the way across the country to Oregon and been held prisoners. And she got hooked up with a domestic violence program in Oregon, and she and her children had just arrived from a cross-country trip all the way from Oregon to West Virginia. So you can imagine that she was pretty frazzled. She was frightened because she was sure he was going to follow her, and her children, of course, were all discombobulated. There was another woman in the shelter at the same time that had some serious mental health issues. And I thought after my first day, wow, I didn't expect this.
And you can't even hear God call when the silence falls.
So Trudy Lawrenson, who was the director at the time and has been a mentor to me. I have learned a lot from Trudy, as well as a lot of other people, but Trudy's rule was when you went to work for the Refuge Center, you spent the first month in the shelter. The shelter is the laboratory. It's where you get up close and personal with people who have been in domestic violence or sexual assault situations, people who've been victims, people who've lived through it and can really tell you what happened to them. People that are in the shelter are there because A, they're homeless, they can't stay in their house, you know, and be hurt, or they're not safe. Most domestic violence victims are isolated. They're kept away from their friends, they're kept away from their family. That's part of the power and control that the abuser has over them. And so when they get to a place where they can make friends, it's wonderful. It's wonderful to see people blossom because they've got somebody they can talk to now, and they've got somebody that can be their friend. And a lot of times in the shelter, we certainly talk to them about their issues and how can we help them, but sometimes we just talk to them about plain old ordinary stuff, you know, and be friends with them. I found out quickly, particularly in Monroe and Pocahontas counties, that oftentimes women needed to get out of a bad situation. But they didn't want to come to the shelter necessarily. But you have this abuser who's in your house, okay, and threatening you. So I found out quickly that there was this law, this domestic violence protective order law, where people could go to the magistrate and they could ask the magistrate to issue a civil order ordering the abuser out of the home, perhaps ordering the abuser to pay you some child support, maybe pay you some support, and that the abuser was to stay away from you. So I started to go into court with people. I was the only outreach advocate at the time, and I was the only person that was doing this on a regular basis. Confidentiality is really, really important for people. It's important for every victim of family violence, but it's extremely important for people in the shelter. So pretty soon there was a long line of people waiting to see me, waiting to talk with me, and Trudy said to me, "We got to do something about this." we decided to move our offices out of the shelter. I just loved the shelter, and I still do, because it's the foundation of our work. Trudy came to me and said there's going to be a meeting of the Coalition Against Domestic Violence, the West Virginia Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And she said, and I think you should go. So I started going to coalition meetings, which were every quarter, and I started to meet some really incredible women, just incredible people. All of the programs in West Virginia started about the same time, with the exception of a couple that have come on a little bit later in the time, but most of them started around the same time. It was a movement that was happening across the country. People were starting to talk about not only women's issues and civil rights issues. This was in the 70s, mid-70s, late 70s. People were starting to talk about what are we going to do about women who are getting hurt in their own homes by the people who are promised to love them. You know, what are we going to do about these kids that are growing up seeing their mother getting beaten up by their father, and they can't tell anybody, you know? Kids that live in domestic violence homes are truly isolated. Are you really going to bring your friends home if maybe that's the night that your dad's going to throw the mashed potatoes all over the kitchen and scream and yell? You're not. So, because of the coalition, I started to get involved with some of those groups, and we formed what was called the West Virginia Family Violence Council. You know, nobody took us too seriously in the beginning. I mean, and I wasn't in the very beginning. There were women doing this work before I came on the scene, certainly. I think the attitude in the beginning of the magistrates and the law enforcement and the doctors and whoever we were trying to push a little bit to help us out was, well, you know, they're kind of a bunch of women that are really gonna, and it was women in the beginning, it was women that did this work in the beginning, is that, you know, they're probably not going to be around for very long. They're going to run out of money, and they're going to run out of energy. They're going to run out of commitment, and they'll like go away, you know. Well, we didn't go away, and because there were so many really, really committed and talented people working on the issues, you know, we got the laws changed. We got them changed in Charleston. We got them changed in Washington, D.C. One of the things that the Violence Against Women Act did a lot of really good things. It made federal monies available to victim service providers and to law enforcement and to prosecutors. Now we had this wonderful carrot on a stick that we could put out to those groups and say, not only are we inviting you to come to the table and talk with us about how we can all help domestic violence victims in a better kind of way, how our response can be better, now we can get you some money to help us do this. So I was on the West Virginia Family Violence Council, and we were working on some of these issues, and we were working at the legislature to get things changed. And I was approached by the Women's Commission and asked if I would be willing to put my name in and serve on the Women's Commission. And I thought, sure, I'm interested in women's issues, and it would be nice to have the voice of someone who works with victims on that group. And so I was appointed by Governor Caperton to the Women's Commission, and I served for about a year and a half as the co-chair of the West Virginia Women's Commission. That was a good experience for me because what I saw there was, I saw the other kinds of issues West Virginia women were facing. For instance, West Virginia women are near the bottom still, I think, of the pay scale. You know, they don't, compared to what a man makes and a woman makes, it still isn't okay. Many of them are not educated. And one of the things we did at the West Virginia Women's Commission while I served on it was to publish a book called Women in the Law. And it was a wonderful resource for women, not just dealing with domestic violence, but with bankruptcy, with inheritance, with child support, all the issues that a woman might encounter, employment discrimination, sexual harassment. And it was one of the things that I'm proudest of that I did when I was a member of the West Virginia Women's Commission. There was a group in West Virginia that was going to go to the United Nations Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing, China. And they were going to take applications, and they were going to choose some women, and they were going to try to send those women, all expenses paid, to Beijing. So I got all excited, and I brought this announcement to the staff meeting, and I said, look at this, we could go, who could go? And they said, well, Gloria, if you're interested, you ought to apply, you know. Just as walking into the shelter in November of 1986 changed my life forever, just changed it. Going to Beijing changed my life forever. It was just incredible. There were 32,000 women from 170 countries there, okay? We sat in a room with women from all over the world, and we all knew what we were talking about. We all had the same issues. We all knew what we wanted. It was just wonderful to meet women from all over the world who cared about the same things that I cared about, who were facing the same issues that I was facing. One of the other things was that at the time, South Africa had just gained their independence. And I think, Nelson Mandela is one of my real heroes, because Nelson Mandela had every right to go out and look for vengeance. Here was a man that was in prison for, I can't remember how many years, decades imprisoned. His people were oppressed in ways that we can't even imagine. And he turned around and offered his hand out to the other people and said, let's stop this. Let's not keep doing this. Let's figure out a way to make a country. Now, South Africa is not a perfect place, okay? Certainly. And neither are we. But I met women from South Africa just on the heels of having a new country and the right to vote. And I met a woman who stayed at the same hotel that I did, and she had stood in line for 10 hours for the privilege of voting, and was so excited because she got to vote, was just thrilled. And then I look at us, and we have to literally drag people to the polls, Now I can hear those voices saying, well, it doesn't make any difference, but it does make a difference. They were so joyful about just having that right to vote, So it was just a life-changing event for me to go to Beijing. It happened in 1995. Here we are 12 years later. I can still see it in my mind's eye like it happened yesterday, I met women from every continent, all over, and women who came at issues all kinds of different ways. And I got to do some fun things while I was there. I got to go to Tiananmen Square. I got to go see the Forbidden City. I went to the Great Wall of China and walked on it. It was really pretty astounding. If I didn't know it before, I learned it there, that we're all the same. We look a little different. I could hardly talk for the first week I came home. I just couldn't convey to people what I had experienced. You know, I've had time to think about it and time to mull about it, and there's never been another conference on women. There's never been a UN worldwide conference on women since then. And if there was another one, believe me, I would take the money out of my bank account. I would gather up my daughters and my granddaughters, and we would all go. We would all go, because it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And what it did for me was to come home and say, this is a terrible problem in West Virginia. It's a terrible problem in the United States. It's a terrible problem all over the world. And we need to do something about it. You know, we need to start to work on these issues. It broadened how I thought about domestic violence and violence against women. And violence against women is part of not just violence against women. It's part of any oppression. Oppression of people because of their color, because of their beliefs. Oppression of people because they're poor. And women are just part of that oppression, you know. If I've heard it once, I've heard it 1,000 times. Well, if somebody was beating me up, I'd just leave. Or, how come she goes back? She must like it. And I think people don't understand. They really don't understand, and so they say that because they don't understand. The reason that people don't leave is because there is a terrific amount of power and control. That's what domestic violence is about. You know, it's how one family or household member gets and maintains power and control over another family and household member. And sometimes they use violence, and sometimes not. And sometimes they have to use lots of violence, and sometimes they don't have to use much. But the bottom line is, it is not all right to use violence to get what you want. And that's the bottom line, and I don't care what else.
One day she'll rise and fly.
And I went out to see her. She had bruises on her face. So the next thing I know, found out she was found dead. They say they investigated it, but he always went around in town saying that he was going to kill her.
In 2006, in October, in West Virginia, there were 12 domestic violence murders in 1 month. We should hang our heads in shame that that can happen in our state. That's a horrendous statistic. Anywhere from 35 to 45% of all the murders that happen in West Virginia consistently, year after year after year, are domestic violence murders. So the Supreme Court said, we're going to form some fatality review teams, and they're going to review fatalities of people who have had contact with the court before they were murdered, to try to figure out, does the court need to do something differently?
He started telling everybody that he was going to shoot me. I thought, well, man, I said, don't I just, you know, I thought to myself, he's just joking, you know. And I heard this noise, and I looked up, and he shot me. And all I can remember is trying to hold the blood in. It was just like, I knew I was dying.
The funerals I've gone to, the women I've seen murdered, absolutely, absolutely. He stalked her. He has kept track of her. His friends have sometimes helped him. He knows where she is and what she's doing and when, and then it oftentimes ends in murder, you know. One of the saddest days in my life on this job was when the day that Loretta Moore was murdered. She was a medical student. And I knew she was being stalked. And police even knew she was being stalked. She went to the daycare provider, took the kids into the daycare. When she got in the car, he was in the car with a gun. And later that day, he killed her, and then he killed himself, you know. It was an awful day because we thought we had done everything we could to protect her. And I think at the time, there were probably people that didn't think this could ever happen to a medical student, could it? Doesn't happen to that group of people. Yes, it does. You know, wouldn't happen to a doctor. Yes, it does. Wouldn't happen to a lawyer. Yes, it does. We still get the attitudes, and we still have the victims who don't know where to come for help. And I don't know how the problem will get solved. Probably when there's the will out in the community to solve it, I think. Just about the time you get discouraged in this job, you go to Walmart, and you know, our policy has always been never to, in public, never to recognize a victim or survivor. That may put them in danger. They may not want people to know that you've worked with them. This has happened to me, I don't know how many times. You're walking down the aisle in Walmart or the Kmart or the Kroger's, and somebody goes by you, and you just go by them. And then pretty soon they poke you in the back and they say, "Hey! Hey, don't you remember me?" And you go, "Yeah, I remember you." And then they look you straight in the eye and they say, "You saved my life." Well, you know, and they give you a big hug. Well, what more? What more do you need? What they're really saying is that you made a huge difference in their lives. You know, you helped them. However, they did the hard work. Survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault do the hard work. They're already doing hard work. You can't live in an abusive relationship and not be doing hard work. We just sort of come along and cheer them on and help them with this or that they need a little bit of help with. Most survivors do it themselves, but they don't recognize that. Sometimes they don't recognize how strong they are, but sometimes they do. They, you know, after a little while they say, "Wow, I can really do this." And boy, that's like wonderful stuff. When I walked in the door in 1986, I thought this was going to be my job for a while. Well, it isn't my job. It's about a commitment to really making something change. And I think I have been part of making something change. I haven't been responsible for any change particularly, but this collective group of people that I've worked with that are committed to making things change, I think we have made some changes. And so you can't just walk away from that. And I feel it's part of being a Christian. You know, it's part of what Jesus said about us taking care of each other, you know, to treat our brothers and our sisters like he would treat us, big order. So I view it as being just part of my life and part of who I am, you know. I didn't think that when I walked in the door, but I know it now. I know that now. It's been a pretty good run, I'd say.